Hi there. I must have seen the play about a dozen times.
Yes, not quite as much.
Not as many as you. And I'm always struck by the profound feelings that you have afterwards. I mean, how do you feel after this?
Well, this, of course, Holocaust Memorial Day yesterday, and the liberation of Auschwitz, and I was there. And this is, of course, something I never forget, that I was near to death, and suddenly the Germans left, and we were left on our own, and we were 10 days on our own till eventually the Russians came. So this is something I remember, of course, where it's part of, my survival. But of course, especially the death of my father and brother is something I will never get over. So this, to see my brother portrayed here in the play, and my father coming back to Amsterdam, and I don't know if you get all this, with where we were measured for my father, and I hear the voice of my father, we will be safe here. And so it's, of course, very, very emotional. But, Anne Frank says in her diary, when she dies, she would like to live on. And very often my mother, and she does, because everybody knows about Anne Frank, but very often my mother and me said, what about poor Heinz? He's forgotten by the world. And through seeing him and sharing his life with many, many audiences all over the world, I feel he's come back to life. So this is very important for me to see that he is, has as well a life after. And this is so important to remember the Holocaust. I met the other day, I was in Russia last year, a man who went around through Russia to try to find names of the people who were shot in villages in Russia and Poland, and where the whole family have disappeared. And they would really like to find all the names to put them in Yad Vashem, so that people haven't lived completely in oblivion and been forgotten. So this is why Holocaust Memorial is so important, to remember the millions of people who, many of them didn't leave a trace behind in the world.
So in terms of your story, I mean, your story and Anne's story, do you think that people really understand the importance of Anne's story, even though we are now, I'm 67 in 2 days' time, and I was born just after the Second World War, so it must be 68 years ago. Do you think they still see Anne's story as relevant, or do they just see it as a nice opportunity to be sad about the past?
Well, it's more her messages which she gives in the diary, because she was 13, 14, not quite 15 when she was arrested, not 15 when she was killed. And as a young age, she had already such a thought in humanity, in women's rights, in racism, on religion. She had an opinion. And this is what people appreciate now, I think, because it's not a Holocaust book. When it became so famous, people didn't really want to read about the Holocaust. It was too painful, and I think there was as well a great guilt feeling. When after the war, in the time when you went to the movies, you had newsreels, and the liberation of the camps was shown. You were, of course, not, you never saw that. And those were horrific pictures. And I think when the world realized what really had happened, which they knew, but couldn't imagine it. But when they saw this, I think there was a great guilt feeling in the world. And that's why when I came back, I was 15, and I was desperate to talk about my experience, but people didn't want to hear. And so survivors had to suppress it, and then later, after 10, 20 years, when people asked us, we were not ready to talk. But the diary was the only book which gave a little bit an insight in it, and that was just enough for people to read about it.
It's very interesting that Anne Frank comes across, as you do in this presentation, as a girl, a cheeky girl, a girl who doesn't want to accept what their parents are telling them, their parents are authority and all that. Did you think that the play captures that kind of human side of what it was like to be not just a young girl, but also a young girl who was caught in the hiding?
Yes, well, of course, unfortunately, there is not a lot about Anne Frank. And that was a playwright. I met him many, many times. He consulted with me. The play is called Remembering the World of Anne Frank. And so there was a lot more about Anne Frank in it, but he never got the rights to use anything what she wrote in the diary. So he had to use only the bits which Ed and me told him about it. So, there's not really a lot about Anne in the play, but her name is there, and this is important.
And in a way, what do you think the play teaches this generation of young people who have come to the university in the 21st century?
Well, even, we in the 30s, yes. Even so in the 30s, could never imagine that something could happen in our world, in Europe. And this is something I think, you do see at home in your television, you see atrocities happening around the world, but that it happened in your own country where you've lived for generations, that you are suddenly picked out because you had a different religion. I think this is something which you just can't imagine. And I think the play describes it very well. And you see it. I don't know if you can feel it, that this is really what happened. And it's difficult to comprehend. And this is, I think, why the Holocaust has become such a subject of study, because as human beings, decent human beings, we just can't understand that it could have happened without the world blinking an eyelid. This is really the crime, that the world knew but didn't care.
Do you think the world didn't care or was too concerned with its own preoccupations?
I think they didn't really care. There is this happening about the St. Louis. It was a ship which left Hamburg with, I think, 3,000 refugees. And it went to Cuba. Cuba had some problem, didn't launch the land. So it was a German ship with a German captain. The captain said to the people, "Don't worry, we'll get you to land somewhere." They tried America, and the American Coast Guard said, "If you come near in our water, we are going to sink you." The ship went back to Europe. Most of the people perished, were sent back to Germany. So people knew it. They had it on their own shore, America. And they didn't, they didn't care.
So
this is what we have to teach, and I think you young people understand this now, but we mustn't be indifferent. We must look at the world, what is happening. And luckily, I think you understand there's a lot of student protests all over the world when things are bad, when terrible things happen. And unfortunately, there are again dictators and tyrants in the world. Doesn't always help, but I think eventually we will succeed to change the world. This is really my message to all of you, and I'm an optimist, and I think there's so many young people who go in the holidays to Africa and Asia and help people there, and understand the need of a big change, and we do need that.
Does anybody want to ask a question now of Eva? Can you stand up and shout?
You might still have to hear. I don't hear so well.
Yeah, you're doing fantastic.
While the microphone, I'd just like to tell you that Eva's bought copies of the book here, and it's personally signed by her, every copy. I read this book in 1997, and it helped to change the way I looked at things. I'm sure it will help to change the way you look at things. Normally the book sells for £8, right? But we've got it on special offer here for £7.99.
No.
£7, actually. I think that's £7. £7. They're all signed by Eva. They're out there. It was free to come in here, but it will cost you £7 to get out. Right, so don't forget to buy the book.
Thank you for that commercial break. Would you like... Yeah, sorry, could you...
Eva, you mentioned that you'd been back to Auschwitz recently. So I was wondering whether, for those who have been back to Auschwitz or other camps, or people who plan to or are interested in visiting concentration camps, what you think we should try to achieve by visiting them?
You heard that, did you?
Yeah, I've been back in 1995 when the Dutch television asked me to go there and do a program with them because it was the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and it was horrible. And but many people go in the summer, and the camp, you know, it looks completely different. At that time, there was no grass, no trees, no birds. If you go in winter, you get the feeling. And I think when I went with my husband, you know, he had read a lot about it, he heard about it, but the size of it, the starkness of it, the barbed wires, he burst into tears. And I think seeing one of those things, you get a better image, really, of what it was like.
Anybody, any other questions?
I was wondering if your experiences changed your religious outlook or any of your beliefs in any way.
Well, definitely. Of course, I don't know how I would have lived if I wouldn't have experienced that. But if you go through something like that, you know, you have a completely different concept of life. You know, there can't be a bad disaster anymore for me. Little things which other people find already terrible, you know, I think, well, that's not so bad, you get over that. You might worry about your exams and about some studying and things like that. It's really, I mean, it's of course important, but it's not a tragedy if you fail something or something like that. You can redo it.
Any other questions? This chap there, sorry.
Hi. Have you ever felt that you've come in any way even close to understand how it was that other human beings were able to come?
Understood how people ever could do this on a human basis. Have you ever really said, this is human beings doing it to human beings?
No, not really. This is what is still so incomprehensible. I have had talks with many rabbis trying to find an answer. And, you know, nobody can give you an answer because, you know, we are supposed to created in the image of God. Well, you know, that is certainly not how you imagine God to be. But the only thing what people say, we have a choice. You can choose good or evil. This is what God has given us. But how you can choose such evil, no, I don't understand. And I don't accept it.
Sorry, we've got a last question here. Sorry.
How has your experience?
Sorry, can we have your...
How has your experience with people in general changed your belief or faith in God?
In evil?
Well,
in
my
people.
experience.
Your experience.
Yes, well, that is, of course, I get that asked very often. And I must admit, when I was in the camp, the only thing I could do was pray, and everybody prayed for God to stop this. And God wasn't there for us. So I came definitely out of the camp an atheist. But, you know, life without, and I hated everybody. So I was for 20 years really a very, very miserable human being. If you have no faith, no belief, not in humans, not in God or in anything, you know, you suffer. And it was Otto Frank who said to me very often, you know, if you go through your life hating, you'll be a miserable person. The people you hate, they don't even know about it. So slowly I try to get back to a normal life because basically I love life, I'm an optimist. And I think after the birth of my first daughter, which I think was a miracle because, you know, I was really damaged mentally and physically. And I was able to give birth to a perfect, wonderful human being. And I think that really changed my belief in the world and more to it, that you're just born and died.
I think it's really interesting. I'd like to just make a point about the recurrence of hate. I think what Eva's talking about is this, in a sense, is about human beings hating human beings. And I would just like to give you a thumbnail sketch of the reality of all this. I was born after the Second World War into a London Irish family where I was taught to hate Jews, black people, Indians, and other people. And this was after the war. Even though what people went through, and they saw the gas chambers, they saw Auschwitz, they still practiced that poison. And they poisoned people like me as a young boy and as a young man. And what we've got to realize that until we challenge that poison, then Eva's story will live for generations and generations. I look forward to the day when Eva's story will be a piece of history rather than contemporary reality, where so much hatred is directed at people who don't fit in to our own belief of the world.
Thank you, John. Thank you. We are kind of, because we had to start at 7:30, originally it was supposed to be at 7, so we're running a little bit late. So what we're going to do now, we're going to invite Ben. Ben Kentish, of course, who invited for me to bring the play here, and the president of the Oxford Union, who's going to... Sorry, not Oxford, sorry, Freudian slip there. Sorry. Cambridge Union.
Thank you, Eva and John, and all our cast for that wonderful performance. We're going to have quite a brief discussion now about some of the broader implications that's been raised by the play and by Eva's story. I'll just let people go.
Don't forget the books.
We are running late, so... it's just some of the broader issues that have been raised. I think my first question for all three of you really is quite a simple one. And did you think enough is done in the form of these events and remembrance generally to remember the Holocaust and learn from it and mark what happened? Because it seems like sometimes in comparison to, say, Remembrance Day in November, actually not that much is done by way of events to signify the importance of it.
Can I just answer that question? I mean, I was there, and as Eva was, when Tony Blair announced, I think it was in 2001 or 2000, that, and Jack Straw was there, that there was, every year, there was going to be a Holocaust Remembrance Day, if you remember, from Westminster. We were there with Blair, and it was, the first event was quite a remarkable event. I mean, everyone supported it, a lot of media there, etc. The Queen, Prince Charles, all of them were backing it, etc. And then slowly, it kind of got the media lost interest. I'll give you an example. Last year, a friend of mine, who's now the head of Edelman, which is the PR company, was invited by Auschwitz to generate interest in Auschwitz for raising money to keep the place, the camp going. She approached all the media, and nobody was interested. No one was interested. And in subsequent years, the Holocaust memory has kind of faded out of everyone's memory. This year, for some reason, it's come back up again. It's a lot better this year. But last year, hardly anyone has heard of it. What we do with the play is that we use graphically an illustration of the barbarity of that period. See, when you have a Remembrance Day, it's a Remembrance Day, you remember, and it's sad and people go away. But it's through education you change things, not through legislation. Legislation is just the start, but it's through education. Eva's play is a great tool, in educating in the details of what went on. And I've not seen any person that's seen this play, gone away, haven't got something out of it. We perform it in prisons. We've taken it to probably the most famous prison in the world, Robben Island, where Mandela was. We're taking it to, I'm hoping that the G8 summit will host the play this year with my international Israeli and Arab cast. That's our biggest aim. It is a valuable tool. We don't always get the support we need, so we're often running this on a shoestring, literally, and I'm coming to the point, we're working hard. Eva's traveling all over the world at 83 years young. She's an amazing woman, and yet, we still struggle to get the support we need. But we'll never give up on this because this is too important to give up. We're taking it into the footballing world. I forgot to mention that. You know, we persuaded David Bernstein, the chair of the FA, who came to see the play when you met him, if you remember, Ben. And he is now very keen to help us. And we're going to be launching the first event at West Ham Football Club. And then we're going to take it round the other Premier Division football clubs. Because anti-Semitism is on the rise now. There is a disturbing element, especially in the Eastern European countries, where anti-Semitism, racism, is actually not being tackled. You know, in some countries, the Russian ambassador told us this, in some parts of, in the Ukraine and places, they've still got Waffen-SS marchers down the high street. Can you imagine? You've got McDonald's, you've got, you know, Burger King, and then you've got the Waffen-SS walking down your high street, and no one's doing anything about it. You know, Britain was one of the few countries, 20 countries, that did not sign the Russian draft resolution against Nazi glorification. 144 countries signed, but our country was one of the ones that didn't. And I wanted to remind William Hague, in 1997, I got him to sign the Anne Frank Declaration Against Hate. And the fact that he didn't support the resolution because of political reasons, I find that a disgrace. Sorry, I had to say that because these guys have had a...
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Eva, does it concern you that when there are not as many survivors left to tell their stories, does it worry you that that message is lost and will be diluted? And how do we ensure that the importance of the message, your story, is continued in the coming decades?
Well, it will be diluted, you know. I mean, we can still tell the story how it really was. We have, of course, a second generation organization. Unfortunately, not all second generation want to be part of it, but they definitely will take over. It won't be as strong. And I'm sure in 30, 40 years, the Holocaust will be denied much more than it is now. People will write about it. People believe the written word. And so it is so important. I've just now been in California. I went to the Shoah Foundation, where they have, of course, testimony of everybody who was willing, and most survivors were willing to give it. So you can study it, but it's not the same as seeing this and speaking to somebody who was there. But, you know, I think it was such a horrendous event in history that it will not be forgotten.
Do you also feel that, I mean, there's been some discussion in recent years, I've been reading about people suggesting the significance of the Holocaust has been diluted also by kind of grouping it together with other genocides such as Rwanda. I know Holocaust Memorial Day is now kind of Genocide Memorial Day too. Do you think it's important to consider that kind of, those atrocities as a whole? Or was the Holocaust something so exceptional?
Because I don't think something like this Holocaust will ever happen again. Yeah. But we see genocides are happening even now, and this is what we really want to avoid. So we are not just teaching about the Holocaust, but about genocide in general. This is something that must stop.
Nick or John, did you want to?
I think there's something very weird about the Holocaust. I think it's an aberration. I'm basing this on my own studies over the years. You know, what happened in Rwanda and happened in other things were often to do with tribes clashing. It was to do with land. It was to do with some object. The thing about the Holocaust is it was government policy to go and take a people who had been in Europe for not very long, 300, 400, 500 years in some place, and make them the scapegoat of everything that was wrong in society. And I think that is quite unique. I don't know, even if you look at the way that, for instance, the Daily Mail talks about immigrants and foreigners, I don't know that they ever get to that kind of really poisonness that you had about government policy. And what is so interesting about the whole Hitler experience, on the 30th of January, which happens to be my birthday, on the 30th of January, Adolf Hitler was given power as the largest party in the Reichstag by Hindenburg to be the Chancellor of Germany and really to get on with their political program. And their political program from the very beginning was to turn on the Jews. It wasn't an aberration, it wasn't something we're going to get around, but it was to blame the Jews for everything that was wrong about the Weimar Republic, about the failures of the First World War. I don't know. That really screws the mind just thinking about that. And I think we really do need to remember that in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time, that was a unique moment in human history that I think I still cannot understand. And I don't know anybody who's ever explained the rationale of a cultured people turning on its own citizens. Some of them had been fighting in the First World War. There was a larger percentage of Jewish Iron Cross winners in the First World War than any other group. All sorts of things like that.
Well, also Frank
was an
first
officer.
as
When
an
I was
officer.
now in Shoah, in the Tolerance Museum in LA, they have a very unique document. They have a letter, typewritten letter from Hitler from 1919, with this 2 pages typewritten, where he says everything bad about the Jews. He just goes on and on and on and on condemning the Jewish people. So then he was a relatively young man, and later when he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, he mentions, of course, a lot about the Jews, but in 1919 he already was poisoned with this hatred of the Jews, and that he was a nobody, that people could follow him. This is really another unbelievable
The other
fact.
thing to remember is that, interestingly, 3 years ago, I read an article about a shop in India, of all places. It's called the Hitler Shop, and they sell Nazi memorabilia. And a lot of young people, because the swastika is like the Hindu sign, the reverse. Yeah, so they think Hitler was because he was Aryans, Indians think themselves Aryans, he must have had a point, and that and the swastika was a sign of peace. So it's perverse that there are people in unexpected places, right, thinking that Hitler was a man of good. So we are taking I'm taking Eva and the play to those sort of places to educate those young people why that Hitler wasn't some kind of hero and they shouldn't worship him. But there's not enough education being done around the world. And there is clearly an issue with, of course, the Middle East situation, of course. You know, you must have read recently about the Liberal Democrat member of Parliament who spoken on a platform with a swastika by the side and tried to link what's happening in Palestine, Israel, with the Holocaust. And I gave an interview about this in South African radio. I was there to talk about the play, and then I got bombarded by questions about, what about Gaza? You know, it's the Holocaust, you know? And I tried to explain, actually, the situation in Gaza, no one is justifying. The situation has, I say this as a Muslim, the situation has to be resolved. But demonizing the Jewish people and Israel only worsens the situation for the Palestinians, because Israel goes into a protection mode and obviously feels threatened and surrounded, and nothing gets resolved. So we have an opportunity here, and stories like Eva, to actually say to those people who are trying to divide Jews and Muslims, actually we're part of the same humanity. You know, we have had enough of the hatred. We don't want it anymore. And ordinary people need to stand up, you know, and say this, publicly say this. You know, so when you get MPs, you know, and respected civil people in the media come along and actually, that's what I do to him more often than not, come along and say these kind of things, then what happens is it affects the way that young people see things. You know, so it's important that people take some responsibility in the kind of things that they say.
I think we had a question.
You were talking about Hitler's planned intent, saying that from 1933 he was from 1933 that he wanted to kill the Jews. Basically, you said that that was his intent. But most historical researchers, such as Hans Mommsen, take a more functionalist approach and say that the Jewish policies actually developed over time and situational factors led to the culmination in the concentration camps in Auschwitz. And I was just wondering, Eva, whether you felt that it was planned from the beginning, or whether you felt that it actually was just as a result of a development of policies that got to the extreme.
No, they didn't want to kill Jews at first. Definitely not.
I didn't say that, by the way.
No.
You didn't say that.
No. Hitler wanted to get rid of the Jews. This was really the plan. They negotiated with the Mufti from Jerusalem to get them to Israel, Palestine at the time, but of course he was even more anti-Semitic than Hitler. So that didn't work. They tried to get them to Nigeria and all kind of
Tanganyika.
All kind of wherever. And the best proof is that my father-in-law was arrested in 1933. He was one of the first people in Dachau. And in 1936, he was released under the condition that within a month, he and his family leave the country. If not, he will be taken back in again. And they traveled through all the consulates all over Germany, everywhere, to try to get a visa anywhere in the world. And nobody would give it to them. Then eventually they heard that the British consul in Munich had a few special visas, only a few for letting people into Palestine, and so they got out. But, you know, if more Jews had been able to get out, this wouldn't have happened.
And even Nick mentioned a moment ago that there are, of course, people who do still consider Hitler as a hero and someone to emulate. And there's been a lot written in recent years, particularly about the rise of the far right and neo-fascism, neo-Nazism. I guess to all three of you, and even particularly given your story, how terrifying is that? Can it be put into words, the fear of something like that ever happening again?
I think you'd be the best to answer that one, Eva.
Well, as I say, I don't think anything like this will ever happen. Like John says, this was really a unique thing in history. But we have to stop any genocides. This is why I think it is good to remember in the Holocaust Memorial Day, not just the Holocaust, but all the genocides, because that is bad enough. And especially Jewish people value every life. For us, a life is valuable. The Palestinians, you know, when they do suicide bombing, the mother said of their son, this was the best day in her life. I mean, you know, what kind of people are that? Yeah. And Goebbels, who was with Hitler, the propaganda minister, was with Hitler and his wife Goebbels' wife in the bunker when the Russians came. And his wife killed her own 6 children, poisoned them. You know, what kind of people were that? So, as I say, this is a unique time in history. Yep. But every life, when a child is killed, even now in London, this murder now again of a 16-year-old boy, you know, means this is just outrageous. It has to stop.
Yeah, but what's
I think one of the things we've got to realise is that the background of what happened in Germany was economics. It wasn't just. It was the failure of the 20s, the total collapse, when people couldn't feed their children. And when you can't feed your children, you can become very reactionary. If we can't feed our children in 5 or 10 years' time, then we can become very reactionary. And some of the wonderful things that we take, the liberalism, the kindness to strangers, may well disappear if the economic crisis grows and grows. And all of this wonderful liberal education will just go down the tubes if you don't find the means of feeding yourself and your parents don't find a way of feeding you and all that. So we do have to remember that it's all very much based on trying to keep a liberal democracy going. And we have to defend liberal democracy with tenacity. We have to be aggressive in our defense of liberal democracy. We have to be virulent, vigilant. We can't just leave it to the sense of well-being. We have to defend what we've got, because it's the most precious thing that we have that will enable more and more people to have freedom, more and more people to have the kind of life that we want. But if the economy goes, most of us are screwed.
What's interesting, John, is that the stories that I've been hearing from liberal, reasonable people who are now concerned about immigration. Now, the immigrants, they're worried about millions of Bulgarians going to come here and going to be taking all our jobs, our services, etc. Of course, in pockets of areas of Britain, you know, because of the way that things are planned, you know, it might give that impression. But the truth is, that's not the truth. Okay? There are people, dangerous people out there who will try to give this wrong perception of immigration. Immigration has helped this country in so many different ways. So I'm a son of an immigrant. Okay? I love Britain. I'm loyal to this country. I'll do anything for it. Okay? But when I hear people give me the kind of look, right, saying, "What are you doing here?" You know, and I say, "Well, I've actually been here longer than you have." So, you know, I've lived in this country 3 times as long as you have, and you're calling me a packy, and I should go back home. Where do you want me to go? Kendishtown? Right? So the point is that it's easy, John, to blame. The blame culture comes into this. Of course, I've seen people without anything, but they don't hate people. It doesn't necessarily mean that I've been to Africa a few times, you know, on anti-poverty things. I was in Mozambique. People were wonderful there. They weren't hating everybody. It's just someone comes along and creates division and say, well, they've got all of that and you've got nothing. That's exactly what Hitler did. The Jews, they've got everything. They're rich people, you know. It's the bankers, they're all the Jews, you know. So they're the ones that, you know, so we have to be vigilant of those kind of people.
I'm aware we're quite short on time, so just 2 very quick last questions. The first one mainly for Eva. Eva, Nick and I were saying earlier, who deny everything we've discussed today, deny it happened at all, deny that, you know.
You know, how important they are. Because I don't believe that there's anybody in the world who really believes that it hasn't happened. So they are just troublemakers.
So we shouldn't sort of engage, we should just not even...
That was our thing that Ben and I were discussing this afternoon, doing a debate with you and David Irvine here.
Well, because you can't talk with those people. Kitty Hurst, who's a Holocaust survivor, did a program. She went to Auschwitz with some 2 young men who were Holocaust in that. And she showed them this and showed them that and explains it. And they say, don't believe it, it's not true. No, it's all made up. I mean, you know, you just can't argue. In the end, on the television program, she got so cross, she just walked out from the film. She said, you know, you just can't talk with those people. And that is true, because it's, you know...
So who are we targeting with our story then? What kind of people are we trying to get this story?
My last question for all 3 of you.
Can I just make a very general point? You cannot reason somebody, this is not my quote, this is Jonathan Swift. You cannot reason somebody out of something if they haven't been reasoned into it. So if somebody has arrived at a logical conclusion, you then have the chance of then, by superior logic, to defeat them. But the problem is that a lot of the stuff, as I was trying to make the point about Germany in 1933, you've got to find a scapegoat. And finding scapegoats is not about reason. And from the very, very early days of German, of Nazi government, they made it government policy to hound the Jews. And I think what we've got to do is recognize that that's not reasoned. And therefore we have to find a way of defeating the unreasonableness of David Irving. I'm one of those few people who would debate with David Irving.
But you would get nowhere.
I know, but it doesn't matter. But I think it's really important to expose the corruption. Because you know one of the biggest corruptions of Hitler, and they won't accept the fact that while Hitler, who said that he was about Lebensraum, He was about an extended Germany, a 1,000-year Reich. Why was he, in the middle of all that, killing civilians? Armies don't kill civilians, they kill other armies. And therefore, if you actually ask people like Irving, why is it that they were concentrating all those soldiers, all that effort, all that energy, all that money in murdering citizens, civilians? Why did they do that? And why did they do it even more when they were losing the war? So from 42 onwards, that's when the final solution really takes over. And it didn't stop until the beginning of 45, when they knew that they had no chance of winning the war. And that is one of the biggest pieces of bullshit. So when you talk to people like Irving, they always go on about the superior military skills of a scumbag like Hitler. He didn't have them. His thing was not about Labour's realm. It wasn't about the 1,000-year Reich.
Yeah, only
it was
for
about
the
destroying the Jews.
No, for the German people. He wanted to have this superior race
But he didn't.
governing
because
the whole of the European.
He would have concentrated on killing the armies.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
But
you, John.
David
Last
Irving,
question. Sorry, Eva, go.
David Irving had a court case here in London against Professor Lippmann from Atlanta, a 6-month court case. All the brains were there, and he lost, and he still goes on. You know, you can't.
You, Eva, when we were in South Africa, you were invited to speak against those. You know, you went especially.
Yeah,
you went there because a Muslim station, South African Muslim station, had made some reference to anti-Semitism, denying the Holocaust. And Eva was brought as a witness. Do you think you coming as a witness changed that radio station at all? So why did you do it?
Because they asked me to, and I didn't know exactly what it was all about when I went there. But
it's important that you did
but
it.
But I mean, they wanted to have an outcome that they have to stop this. So that might still happen, but it doesn't mean to say that they're convinced that they are not in their right. You know, they might government. Like David Irving is not any Holocaust denial in Germany or Austria is an offense and people go to prison. And I think that is right, because then they can't speak about it.
My last question, very briefly, because I'm aware we've overrun quite a lot, is 2 or 3 of you really. What would be your message to us, to students at Cambridge, to people who are just not so aware of the issues, but kind of aren't campaigning in the way that you 3 are? What would be your message to us to help make sure this never happens again, and to continue the message that all 3 of you are promoting?
Well, I did say it actually in my message before, so I'll let you say it now.
What should we be doing? What can we do?
God, I'm not the person to ask, because I believe, as I said, I think we've got to defend liberal democracy. And I think there are too many people having a snide snap at it. There are those people who say liberals become reactionaries. I think we really do have to defend our universities. We have to defend the right of our universities to think independently. We have to encourage the growth of people from where I come from, which is called the underclass, to get into university. I think we have to do all those sorts of things. When only 0.5% of people from a social security background get into higher education, that is a criminal human rights abuse. And I think that's the kind of stuff that breeds the kind of ugly underside that undermines the strength of liberal democracy. I'm a great believer we need to extend the liberal democratic process to everybody in society, into the poorest. So that's my angle. I believe that the more you can be active, participatory Democrats and not simply representational Democrats, I think that is what I'm looking for.
Right. Well, what can I say? He said everything I wanted to say, but but basically, what you can do is tell everyone what you saw today. Yeah. Tell everyone that you've actually met a person that went through this suffering, and she's real. This did happen. This is not a lie, right? This is the truth. Tell as many people as possible. Many of you here will go on to become successful in different
MPs.
careers. Members of Parliament, you know, you'll be in the banking world, etc., etc., etc. And there is your opportunity where you see discrimination, challenge it. Never let it just go by, because if you let it go by, it will worsen. So my advice to you, Ben, is to tell everyone that you meet, tell them what you saw today and who you met.
I think as well, you know, like you said, the economy is very important. Unemployment is a terrible thing. I've seen in South Africa, in Johannesburg, Cape Town was all right, but in Johannesburg, half the population lives in gated properties, really gated, with electrified barbed wire on their high walls. And more than half the population lives with nothing, really with nothing. So they don't get any money from the social security, doesn't exist. They have no jobs. Like you say, they can't feed themselves, nor their children. So what do they do? Crime. That's the only thing to get food is through crime. And as all the white people are armed, they arm, otherwise they get shot right away. So that's why life there is so dangerous. And so economy, equality, more. Of course, we'll never be equal, but I think tackling the banks, that, you know, there's differences between really poor and ridiculously rich. That is a big harm in the world. And that we should equalize a little bit.
That seems a great note on which to finish. Can we say a huge, huge thank you to Nick, to Eva, to John, and to you.
And can I first of all thank John, obviously. Thank Ben for inviting us and having the vision to make this happen for us. My cast obviously all got to catch trains, so they've disappeared. I can't thank them. Oh, they're there. Okay, some of them are there. So Kevin's been with me for a few years now, and he's a wonderful. And they're up there as well. So thank you very much, cast, for making today very, very special. Thank you for the audience.
Thank you.
And have a good day. But don't forget, please buy the book, because you'll read it and it'll change you. I promise you. Thank you.